All right, happy Mother's Day, everybody. Good to see all of you. I'll probably say happy Mother's Day again if if a couple more people pop in. So I was traveling, or I traveled back to California, so I had didn't upload the last class to the YouTube yet, but I'll get that done today. And then tomorrow, as usual, on Mondays, you'll get the email for the writings and the summary for the week. If you join the Six Bardos cycle a bit late, then you might, yeah, you probably don't. You probably won't get uh, I probably haven't sent you the first email. So, but these classes here, they explain everything. It's just that the writings provide like a succinct version of it and some sections of the excerpts from the text, but it's not a required thing. So last week we left off on the contemplation of suffering, and these are part of the preliminary practices for the Six Bardos text, um, both in the original text and then also in Padmasambhava's commentary. They're regarded as critical and really the foundation for the Six Bardos cycle. The reason the preliminary practices are important, just to um, drive this home again, is that they they allow you to develop the motivation um, for doing this practice or learning this particular dharma. The preliminary practices are there's the contemplation on suffering, the contemplation on the preciousness of acquiring a human rebirth, and then the meditation on death and impermanence. So in the first um, 52 pages on the Kindle version, it explains these first three preliminaries. So you can go and read the text. So you can start from the beginning, if you haven't already, start from the beginning of the book all the way to the end of the chapter on death and impermanence. So today we'll discuss the preciousness of human birth, then the contemplation on death and impermanence, and then we'll open the mandala by reading the initial opening to the text. So the preciousness of human birth and human birth, human rebirth. Oh, by the way, I shared this here uh, in the chat box, so I'll post it again. If you don't have Kindle, these are the texts right here. You could download them from PDF or download them in PDF. There's a third one, which is the American Book of the Dead, but we won't get into that until we get to the sections on the clear light. So you don't need to worry about that one because there's no sections in it about the preliminary practices. Did I freeze? I'm still here. Everyone can hear me okay? Yeah, good. Okay. All right, so while my face is frozen, uh, we'll carry on. So the preciousness of human rebirth and of human birth. The idea behind this section of the text is that by considering how uh, fortunate and lucky you are to be a human, that it will um, motivate you to practice dharma. And the contemplation in the text is to consider that the vast majority of life on the planet is not human. The vast majority of life is of the animal realm and the insect realm. And the idea is that by really taking that in, you are able to see that other types of beings are not able to practice dharma at all, contemplate dharma at all, or receive these teachings in the same way that human beings are able to, or at all. We have some uh, statements here and there about a cow that awakened or a dog that was the manifestation of bodhisattva, and these are generally by by and large exceptions to the rule. Wow, I'm still frozen. Yeah, but everyone can still hear me okay? Okay, all right. It's weird. Okay. So since the human rebirth section is, or the human birth section is, um, you could put it like a deeply, in a way, a deeply Buddhist contemplation. Um, I recommend that you just go and read it from the text. We can get into the contemplation on death and impermanence. In the teaching cycle, it's recommended that you meditate for 3 days on the preciousness of human birth. But for some of us, especially if reincarnation or rebirth is not a notion that has been verifiable to you, or one that you resonate with, it may not be a contemplation that is so relatable. But one that is, of course, are the contemplations on death and impermanence. So I don't mean to be a drag on Mother's Day. So happy Mother's Day again to all of you. But it's really um, often it's the negative or the sufferable side of things that allow us to arrive at and contemplate dharma. The the sections of the text that have to do with death and impermanence, particularly this notion of of impermanence, is that it gradually seeps into us. We can gradually begin to not attach so strongly to conditions if we are willing um, to see their impermanence. All right, great. All right, I fixed that. So how do we do the contemplation of impermanence? Um, in Theravada, also, it's one of the main orientations of your practice. It's one of the main things to see. It's considered one of the three characteristics and also one of the three gates to nirvana. The contemplation on on impermanence is to see and become very intimate with the notion that things are always changing. So often we regard uh, aspects of life and aspects of ourselves as permanent, immutable, or unchanging. And the idea with seeing impermanence really clearly is that it dispels this particular notion of permanency. So, Oops. One of the initial objects that's used for contemplation of impermanence is the impermanence of the body. And that manifests very clearly as the aging process. And seeing how that's also a sufferable condition. These these considerations of suffering, impermanence, and death, when we really take them to heart and when we really see them clearly, it motivates us to practice and it allows us to turn away from the mundane, turn away from our cyclical activities and habits. In relation to the death contemplation, the idea is that we assume that we have time. So because we assume that we have time, there's no urgency to practice. There's no urgency to be mindful, and there's no urgency to study dharma and apply ourselves to the path. But if we didn't have time, let's say you only had a week or a month or 6 months or a year to live, that would that would cut through an immense amount of noise, an immense amount of what is unnecessary and not particularly important or skillful. A contemplation is a bit different than a meditation. In a meditation, you take a specific object and you apply your attention to that object in a way that you're developing a calmness, and you're not engaging the thinking process when you do that. But a contemplation, these preliminary contemplations, are an engaging of the thinking process. You are considering the nature of impermanence. You're thinking about impermanence. You're reflecting on impermanence. Are there areas of my life that I regard as more permanent than others? Are there areas in myself that I regard as more permanent than others? And are there aspects of my behavior or of my thinking where I'm attempting to assert permanency on things that clearly are not permanent? So one of the main ways to reflect on impermanence is to consider aging. S.N. Goenka, the founder of one of the modern Vipassana traditions, he said, from the moment you're born, the countdown to death begins. From the moment you're born, it's a race to the grave, but we don't see it that way because of the glamours and the enjoyments of life. So for the next 3 days, think about impermanence. And then the following 3 days after that, think about death. So today's Sunday, so that means Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you contemplate impermanence. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you can contemplate death. And then we'll go into the three later preliminaries on Sunday, which have to do with guru yoga and supplication to the lineage and all of that. So we're going to compact that into one lesson and then actually get into the first bardo, which is the bardo of the living and the recognition of the nature of your mind. So how do you do a meditation on on impermanence. It's the opposite of how, or yeah, when you do a standard meditation, you let go and you surrender, and usually a recognition of presence begins to grow. There's a calming of mental factors, a deepening of your continuity of mindfulness. Generally, when you meditate and you let go of everything, you feel fine. You feel good. There's a peacefulness that's growing. But the contemplations on suffering, on impermanence, and on death, the aim of these is not to come out of it with a sense of peace. It's actually to come out of it with a sense of urgency. The idea is that uh, if you see one of these aspects or one of these facets enough, it makes you want to practice dharma. You can reflect on how no matter what it is no matter what area of it is in your life, it's subject to change. You don't want your body to grow old, it grows old. You don't want your relationships to change or for favorable conditions to change, but they always change. You don't want to get sick or you don't want people around you to get sick, but they always, sickness is inevitable. So in your sitting for the next 3 days, aside from whatever practices or contemplations you're already doing, begin to see and reflect on how things are always changing. Things are constantly in flux. You want things to be a certain way, but you can't make them that way. So that impermanence of conditions is a cause for dukkha, cause for suffering and irritation, suffering and dissatisfaction. If from this contemplation you feel a dissatisfaction, you feel a kind of turning from conditions, turning away from what happens, that's the direction you want to go in. You may have the question like, what's the point of having this turning or having this resistance? And it's just because it's a preliminary contemplation. You may not actually be able to get into it, but just attempt it. Just try. Try to see how the changing nature of things can be a condition for suffering or can be a condition for dissatisfaction. One of the ways this is also done in the Theravada system is to notice the changing nature of unpleasant sensations. So you sit in meditation to the point where there's some kind of physical discomfort, uh, cross-legged or even in a chair. If you just sit long enough, some pain will start to arise. And usually what we do is we move or we shift and we attempt to circumvent and stop that pain. But what's done in the meditation, some meditation practices, is that your attention or your mindfulness is applied directly to the pain, the sensations that comprise the pain. You see that pain is this amorphous flux of sensations combined with a psychological reaction of resistance or aversion. There's a natural tendency for you to want that pain to stop or for you to want that pain to go away. So in this type of meditation, the pain and the suffering doors are present at the same time. You're noticing that there's discomfort, and then you're noticing that the nature of that discomfort is amorphous, changing, and in fluctuation. It's not it's not always uh, the same intensity, and your psychological reactions to it are also not constant. A contemplation on impermanence is thinking, consideration, evaluating, remembering the things that you cared for, or things that you had, or things that were very close to your heart. Eventually you're separated from those things. And in the contemplation, to open yourself to that suffering nature um, that is born of impermanence. The truth and the fact that whatever it is, whatever is compounded, is subject to decay. That was one of the quotes from the Dhammapada. Whatever phenomena are compounded are subject to decay, subject to dissolution. It means that whatever is made, whatever is born, whatever is uh, compounded or put together, inevitably comes apart. Whatever is put together in its own putting together, the parting or the dissolution of that is guaranteed. The idea is, if you see that things are subject to change, and what's compounded is subject to decay, you have less of a tendency to hold on to things. That's really the point that we're going for. Why is it that meditation is so difficult for many of us? It's because we want it to be a certain way. We want to feel a certain way. We want the awakening that these teachers are describing, or that is talked about in these texts. And that wanting creates a friction that can make meditation difficult. Considering what you've gained and what you've lost, what you've had that you no longer have, who and what you were close to that you're no longer close to, maybe even what you used to be that you no longer are. Impermanence. And usually we want to feel better about those things. But in this contemplation, you don't. You want to actually uh, open to the separation, and open to what it is that you had that you no longer have, because of impermanence. Because that, because of impermanence as a principle in life. So many of us are working, of course. So we don't have 3 days to think about the changing nature of phenomena. But what we can do is just consider it to the best of our capacity. 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, or just to see it more. It's like, to do a contemplation, you put on the sunglasses, or the shades of that contemplation. So you want to see things through the eyes of impermanence. zooming out of how you normally regard things and considering, would I be this attached, or would I be so fixated on this if I knew that eventually it would go, or maybe very quickly it would go? We don't see impermanence. That's why we hold on to things, stuff. Maybe some of you have, like me, have parents from older generation. If they're from Asia, they dealt with communism. So um, they tend to have this uh, hoarding mentality. Like it's very difficult to let go of stuff because when they were growing up, they didn't have anything. So they try to just keep as much as they can for as long as they can. And if you've ever had to declutter the garage or a storage area of a parent or a grandparent's place, in my mind, I was like, it's just stuff. But in their mind, stuff always has meaning. There's memories attached to those things, and the sense of comfort that comes from familiar objects, things that are connected to parts of our lives and parts of the past that are no longer there. That's really the point of it, of keeping stuff that you don't actually need or that's just taking up space. It gives you a sense of uh, comfort psychologically. When the impermanence door arises as one of the gates to liberation, what is that like? It's it's as if everything becomes this river. Normally when we're just looking at a room, it seems solid, it seems present. But when you enter uh, the door of impermanence, it feels you feel the fluxing nature of things, and you perceive the fluxing nature of things. It's all just this river of movement. Experience is this river of movement. There's actually nothing solid if you look long enough at it. The visual data gets starts to shift and gets trippy and strange if you notice it for long enough. When you touch something and you feel the sensations of the contact from your hand with that object or from your body with that object, those points of contact are changing. And if you just notice that change for long enough, there's a turning away that can happen. In the stages of insight and Theravada practice, when you enter the impermanence door, it makes this I've had enough state come up. I've had enough. Enough. And that turning allows your mind to release grasping, and then discovery or a falling into your unconditioned nature can occur. The idea is that once the grasping falls away, it's possible to see or experience uh, your true nature. That holding is what that holding can be what is what's in the way. So uh, for impermanence, refer to the Natural Liberation commentary as well, and you can read Gayatro Rinpoche's thoughts on it. The next contemplation is death, and of course, this is my favorite one. I'm able to talk more about death and impermanence. when when you really consider death, uh, urgency is born. Impermanence and suffering, they open more of a turning away, a kind of dispassion. But death gives rise to urgency. Not only are all things subject to decay, but they're subject to ceasing, like vanishing. Keeping death in mind, contemplating death for 3 days, that's very powerful. The commentary in the Tibetan Book of the Dead is to do each of these for 3 days in retreat. And at a later point, you could do that if you like. But to really, really consider that we don't know how much time we have, that's very, very motivating. Um, when we consider that at any moment our our lives could end, there's so much that can come from that. It's not an easy contemplation to do, and it can feel to many of us that it's a thing that we don't want to consider or a thing that we don't want to have on our minds. I was talking with my best friend, one of my best friends, and I said, yeah, you should wake up every day, well, thinking that it might be your last, and how differently your life would be if you lived like that. It doesn't mean that um, you wouldn't plan things or take care of your duties, but that it it can give rise to this type of very laser like focus if you let that in. Even if you did the experiment for one day and you really actually committed to the experiment, like if there wasn't tomorrow, how would I live today? If there wasn't tomorrow, what would I say to the people that I care about? And if at the end of the night I won't open my eyes in the morning, what would that make of today? As a practitioner, it's a thing to consider. It's the because the final day will come at some point, and some of us may have the good fortune of dying gradually, but oftentimes we don't. We don't have that fortune. It can really come at any time. To contemplate death, you can remember death in your life, people that you cared about that that are now gone. And you can consider that often um, people die with regrets and unused potential. If you think of death enough, if you consider death enough, and if you meditate on death, it allows you to be closer and more intimate with life. If death is around the corner, 90% of the unnecessaries are just thrown out the window. But of course, we can't we can't really live like today's our last day, because then we wouldn't work. We wouldn't do half of the things that we need to do to survive. We just stay home with our families. But the point is to see it in such a way that it makes you more focused on the present and more focused on the things that are really important in your life. If you only had a year, if you only had 6 months, 3 months, 7 days, one day, what would that make of your mind? What would that make of your heart? In the conventional sense, when we consider death, it immediately makes us think of things that we want to do that we haven't done, things that we want to say that we haven't said, things that we want to become that we haven't become. So that's in the conventional worldly sense of the term or of the phenomena. But in consideration of dharma, the idea is that by meeting death face to face, you drop the unnecessaries in life. If I didn't have much time, would I actually pursue this? Would I actually worry about it? If I didn't have much time left, is this even something I would be doing? Uh, Death is the victor. In the end, it wins, at least in regard to the body. One of the primary death meditations is called the skeleton practice. So in your contemplation of the three of death, you can refer to the to Padmasambhava's um, commentary as well, but you can go about it in a way that is relatable and understandable to you. Essentially, what I'm explaining is right there in the text. Just the urgency that is born of really seeing death and seeing that so much time is wasted on entertainment, on comfort, on things that arise and pass, and ultimately things that pass away. when we consider the sufferings in our lives, it's like almost everything is tolerable except for the sickness and death of the people you care about. That's really that's really an immensely difficult thing. It's like everything else is is endurable, but being parted from the people you love is is the worst. So to consider the inevitability of of death, it makes us want to seek the unconditioned. Is there a release? Is there a way to overcome this? Many times in the Buddhist texts, when a monk or a nun would pass away, the disciples would ask, you know, what is their where are they now? And if the person became fully liberated, the Buddha would always exclaim that uh, death couldn't find them. So at the moment of passing, their mind was already liberated. The Lord of Death is talked about in so many of these Bardo traditions. Egyptian Book of the Dead, Native American Book of the Dead, Tibetan Book of the Dead. Every culture talks about a transitionary process out of our human dimension, and that transition is accompanied by a Lord of Death or a kind of guide. Some traditions talk about a judgment that occurs in the Tibetan Bardo tradition, or in this particular teaching. The judgment is considered the manifestation of your own guilt and your own karmic tendencies. So, in really believing that you deserve punishment, that's exactly what appears. Death is the cutter of the unnecessary. It is the remover of unskillful cyclical behavior and thinking. So, after your consideration of death, if 3 days is something you can't commit to today or tomorrow, you could think of impermanence for a day. The day after, you can consider death. Back to the skeleton practice. So, one of the 40 objects of meditation that the Buddha taught was to visualize your body as a skeleton, and then also to observe the decomposition of a corpse. Literally, this is for real. So there's many stages of decomposition of a corpse, and the idea is that by seeing death so viscerally like that, you detach, or it becomes more so challenging to cling to the flesh. There's a Bible quote that says, "Flesh shall not inherit the kingdom." Idea is to see that there's no refuge in the body. There's no refuge in this shell. By observing uh, by observing that process of decomposition, by seeing it clearly enough, your your mind is freed, at least temporarily freed. For example, from sensual craving, which is one of the primary obstacles in meditation for many people. Mind can't get still because it keeps thinking about sex, essentially. Can't practice dharma seriously because we're too invested in relationships and all of that. We let those particular things get in the way of practice. Seeing death, considering death, meditating on death, and the specifically the death of the body is powerful in that sense that it releases grasping for the body. You know, I'll read a section from Natural Liberation here. If you do not think, this is Gayatro Rinpoche, if you do not think about death and impermanence, the awareness that there is no time to waste will not arise in your mind stream. That captures the whole thing. If the awareness that there is no time to waste does not arise in your mind stream, you will succumb to laziness and lassitude, and you will not think of dharma. You will apply yourself to the activities of this life and will indulge in indolence and complacency. If you slip into death with this ordinary attitude, your precious human life will have been squandered. So meditating on death and impermanence is extremely important. Once the awareness of impermanence has arisen in your mind stream, you will have no time for lassitude. Earnestly bearing death in mind, dharma will arise automatically. So meditate on impermanence. On the one hand, we can say we all know that we're going to die. That's not news. However, we have not realized that the time of our death is totally unpredictable. We have not truly fathomed the reality of our own death. Considering death that we've seen, death that we've already witnessed, but really considering deeply our own passing. And I'll make a final point here, and then we can take questions, and then we'll meditate. If any of you have known someone who's passed away, you can remember, or if you've known multiple people who've passed away, you can remember. Um, if in your case uh, it wasn't something that happened gradually and that they were able to prepare for. Consider that the night before they passed away, they thought they had another day. Really, really think about that, that they were completely under the impression that they had another day. In my case, um, with a person that I loved, uh, he thought he had more time, and he didn't. And it came as a surprise, and he was not prepared. these considerations on death and meditating on death, it makes you consider really what is important. The reason the midlife crisis happens in men and in women, I mean, can consider it an evaluation point. If you're 2/3 of the way through through the game, 2/3 of the way through the incarnation, it really hits you that that's the case. I probably shared this in another class, but I don't think all of you heard it. But a very um, pertinent conversation I had with a student was when he asked me, "Do you think I've done okay, like in my life?" And it was hard at being asked that by someone who is so much older and successful and all of that. You know, do you think I did the right thing? Yeah. If you consider death in advance, and if you consider that enough, if you're asking yourself those questions now, you can you still have time to make changes. You can make those changes today. Yeah, if you feel like you haven't committed enough to this, or you haven't committed enough to that, or that you didn't try your best in certain areas, if you think about death enough, it will motivate you to change. The idea is that this nature of illusion, this Mara of forgetfulness, um, it obstructs the things that we know are important, even when for a moment we recall them. You know, they call it a moment of clarity for a reason. It's because it's a moment. It was an afternoon, but to make a contemplation regular or to do it deeply in the sense that it's not just a fleeting thing and it's not something that is reactionary, um, it gives you the space to make changes. Often we consider this stuff when there's crisis. That particular student and other particular students, we're always having these conversations when everything falls apart, when they're faced with immense loss. Then you see the truth. Like, oh, yeah, I don't think I should have spent 20 years focusing on that. I think I got good at the wrong thing. So, if that's the case, we don't need to ruminate on the time that we've wasted and feel guilty and ashamed, but we can let that discontent and let that pain be a motivation to deepen our understanding. Um, in these Bardo teachings and in when I've talked about near-death experiences and things like that, during one of our last classes, my friend who's a hospice worker was there, and I said ideally you can laugh in the face of death and you can die happy. And he said, I've been there as hundreds of people have passed away. and I could count on less than one hand people that died smiling. He's like, you're talking about it like it's a thing that happens, and I'm telling you, it's incredibly rare for someone not to pass away in fear or in regret or in something. So, and thus those formations, those holding ons, those graspings that are there at the end of an incarnation appear at the beginning of the next one. And the cycle continues, the wheel turns of cyclical existence. So you have a chance in your life to become freed from attachments. You have a chance to pick up and apply a dharma, whatever it is, and free yourself before that moment. This whole text is about preparing for that day or for that night. Will my clarity of mind be there? Will I have let my practice go before that time? Will I have strength and power of mind? Or will I be uh, succumbed to the process of death? The point with meditation and with all of this is you discover your unconditioned nature, and that's uh, that whole progression and process of recognition is going to be explained, and I'll guide you through it in the Bardo of the Living. Um, Probably, yeah, starting probably next Sunday or next Wednesday. I'll get that hammered out. Yeah. But the idea of the preliminaries is to be somber. It's supposed to be a drag. You're supposed to see the conditioned nature of things. And yeah. And by having that motivation arise, that urgency arise, that sets you up for um, actually doing the practice, actually doing the contemplations. Because one thing to learn it is another thing to do it. It's one thing to learn all this, it's another to actually the apply the steps and apply the meditations. So consider impermanence, consider death for the next few days, and then we'll get into the guru yoga and supplication. Yeah, we're at the hour. I still still have to get to the opening. One moment, everybody. All right. So let's begin with this um, opening to refuge. I'll explain it. So at this point, if you're if you haven't already, switch your orientation to more of a reverent place and consider this supplication to the Dharma. Some of you may not necessarily be Buddhist at all, so you can consider the Buddha here as the revealer of the teachings which lead to awakening, the Dharma as the teachings themselves, and the Sangha as the community of masters and community of practitioners that live out this Dharma, live out this freedom, and uh, promulgate and share these teachings of liberation. The root of this text is Padmasambhava, so the founder of Tibetan Buddhism, that was born in a nation at the time that was known as Odayana, which is, there's debate over where it is, but it's generally regarded as Pakistan. And he had brought the Vajrayana, or the tantric vehicle of Buddhism, into Tibet and subdued the indigenous religion and culture of the time, which was Bun. So we'll get more into Padmasambhava's story in the next class, but here we can consider and invite Padmasambhava into our mind, and I'll be screenshotting, screen sharing a picture of him right now. So this is Padmasambhava, also referred to as Guru Rinpoche, and the teaching on the Six Bardos comes from this master. Padmasambhava taught Dharma during his lifetime, but this specific teaching on the Bardos was revealed as a terma teaching. So that means that at the time he felt that this particular cycle of teaching was too advanced. So he implanted it in the mind streams of future disciples, and so that those teachings would appear at the correct time in our Earth cycle. So they're beings that reveal teachings like that. They're called treasure revealers. Terma means treasure. So the teachings explain that Padmasambhava received this cycle, or is transmitted. The cycle is transmitted directly through him, but it comes from the retinue of the deities, and it comes directly from the nature of mind, uh, the Dharmakaya, that's represented by a Buddha named Samantabhadra, or Vajradhara. Yes, I know some of you aren't too into the Tibetan words and the stuff, and it's all these different names. But this is really how it's presented, that a primordial Buddha, an ancient one, transmitted these teachings, and that they appeared through this through the founder of Tibetan Buddhism. So we invite Pamasambhava, giving him his seat in this teaching cycle and his seat in our hearts as the revealer of this sacred dharma. And this is the liturgy for the refuge. I bow and take refuge in the spiritual mentors who constantly bear in mind the limitless sentient beings of the three realms and six states of existence. In the past, the present, and the future, I bow and take refuge in the Buddhas, the blessed Sugatas of the 10 directions and the 4 times. The foremost amongst people endowed with the signs and symbols of spiritual awakening, whose enlightened deeds are inexhaustible and as vast as space. I bow and take refuge in the sublime dharmas, the dharma of ultimate truth, free of attachment to quietism, the irreversible path of the 3 yanas, which are Theravada, Mahayana, and Vajrayana Buddhism. The scriptures, treasures, oral transmissions, and practical instructions. I bow and take refuge in the sanghas, the field of supreme assemblies who dwell on the unmistaken path, the assembly of Aryas who are utterly free of the taints of mental afflictions, the bodhisattvas, shravakas, and pratyeka Buddhas, who are the supreme upholders of the victor's revelation. I bow and take refuge in the spiritual mentors, who are the very nature of all the Buddhas of the 3 times, the chiefs of all the secret, unsurpassable mandalas, who with blessings and compassion guide all beings. I bow and take refuge in the chosen deities, whom the Dharmakaya, unborn and free of the extremes of conceptual elaboration, emanates as the peaceful and wrathful deities for the sake of the world, bestowing the supreme and common cities, powers. I bow and take refuge in the assembly of dakinis who move in the space of reality itself with the power of compassion, who bestow supreme bliss from a pure abode and grant cities to those who maintain their samayas. I take refuge in the originally pure essence, nature, and compassion, in primordial emptiness, free of conceptual elaborations. And I take refuge in the state of non-grasping, which transcends the intellect, in the nature of the great vast expanse of homogeneous perfection. I take refuge in unmediated, non-conceptual, natural clarity, the identity of the 5 primordial embodiments of the nature of spontaneity, in the Vajra strand of the clear light of my own awareness, in the mandala of the bindu of clear and empty absolute reality and awareness. I take refuge in the unceasing, naturally creative power of the omnipresent, compassionate one, the appearing and liberating, unceasing, playful rays of the creative power of awareness, which from the experience of non-conceptuality dispel the darkness in the minds of beings during the 3 times without beginning or end. And in our next class, I'm going to explain the different um, aspects of this, explaining the terms and phrases. But we'll continue, and then we'll begin the meditation. This is called generating the Mahayana spirit of awakening, generating bodhicitta. Alas, all phenomena are empty and identityless. Pity every sentient being who fails to realize this, so that these beings worthy of compassion may attain enlightenment. I shall dedicate my mind, body, speech to virtue, for the sake of all sentient beings in the 6 states of existence from now until enlightenment is attained. I shall generate the spirit of supreme enlightenment, not only for myself, but for all beings. Pity all those who are without dharma, who shackle themselves in the immeasurable ocean of suffering, so that these beings worthy of compassion may be brought to joy. I shall generate the spirit of supreme enlightenment. All limitless sentient beings and I are primordially of the nature of the Buddha. I shall generate the spirit of supreme enlightenment. As a great being to know that we are indeed of the nature of the Buddha. The ocean of the world's cycle of existence is like an illusion. No composites are permanent. Their nature is empty and identityless. But these children who fail to realize that wander through the 12 links of dependent origination and the cycle of becoming, so that those stuck in the swamp of name and form may attain Buddhahood. I shall dedicate my body, speech, and mind to virtue. To the nectar. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until enlightenment. By my merit of practicing generosity and so forth, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of the world. May I become a spiritual mentor to guide all limitless beings without exception. And finally, the four immeasurables. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness. May everyone be free of suffering and its causes. May we be endowed with sorrow-free joy, and may we dwell in equanimity, free of attachment and hatred. The mantra of Padmasambhava is Om Ahung Vajra Guru Pema Siddhi Hung. This was the opening of the teaching cycle and the refuge supplication. This concludes our class for today.